Hello and welcome to another Overlord lore, or in this case, hypothetical battle video. For today, we will see what happens if you attack Ainz Ooal Gown. But before we do so, let me thank my Patreons for supporting this channel, as well as all users of the YouTube thanks function who made one-time donations. Now, as usual, I will give you a quick recap what happened in the other parts. Then please do so. Check out the links in the description and you will find them. And with that said, here's the recap. The 8 Greed Kings came back to life, attacked Irantel, forced the Sorcerer King to flee, killed Mare, foiled a counterattack in the Holy Kingdom, invaded the Great Tomb of Nazarick, where they now got bogged down, and attacked in a pincer maneuver. The 3 kings who managed to escape to their guild base, as well as the only female player who had been killed and revived, are now witnessing a gigantic horde of demons and ethereal undead descending upon their guild base, instantly causing the recently killed player and another king to lose all will to fight, while the female player sought out the deepest layer of their guild under the pretext of speeding up the resurrection process of fallen troops. She sought comfort in the faint hope that her NPCs will hold off the undead horde, while the cowardly king prepared everything for a hidden super-tier magic spell. As the demons and ghosts of Nazarick descended, dozens of them were annihilated every second by Gatling guns and AAA batteries. Greek-looking statues of marble, amethyst, ruby, and other precious gemstones now came to life and defended the home of their masters with their bows and their javelins, and thus felling many more demons. But then blasts of hellfire from Demiurge's elite force burned right through this cover of demons, because they were using them as living shields to soak up fire, while the true damage dealers of Demiurge were unscathed and could now pick out high-value targets, while only losing those who would have been desummoned anyway in a few hours. And while all attention was directed towards the demonic horde, and the 2 kings fought off the onslaught of undead at the head of their troops, 3 elite strike units landed on 2 opposing sides of the guild base. As soon as Rubedo confirmed that these troops had made it onto the surface, Ainz addressed the 2 kings directly. "Fight Ainz Ooal Gown alone if you want to live." As both sides held back their fire, the kings desperate to turn the tables agreed, hoping that the Sorcerer King's overconfidence would give them an opportunity to turn the tide of this war. As they ascended, both kings hurled Vermilion Novas, the greatest fire spell at the Sorcerer King, hoping to capitalize on the undead's fire weakness. And while Ainz was, indeed, highly susceptible to fire, it wouldn't reach him, because now his marble-white bones turned to black fur and fancy clothes, his hood to a top hat, and his 2 burning eyes into a single sealed artifact that now unleashed the greatest spell. Grand catastrophe. The Vermilion Novas of the kings were instantly extinguished, and the kings themselves were knocked back a mile before they could stabilize themselves upon receiving the impact of this spell, only to be then greeted by yet another iteration of this undead. Sensing that they had been fooled, they now ordered their dragons and wyverns to attack this king, only for him to activate something that surely they must have overlooked the first, second and third time they have met. A red orb began now to glow brighter and darker than a giant star, bathing the place in unholy red light. After just another moment, the still blinded kings heard stone crashing into stone as petrified wyverns and dragons were falling down onto their guild base. Desperate to flee, both kings attacked the Sorcerer King with the red orb, only to be counterattacked by yet 2 more undead, 1 Death Emperor and 1 Death Empress, each summoned by one of the Sorcerer Kings, since Pandora's Actor had now retransformed. Trapped between 4 powerful undead, they hoped that the super-tier magic the other king was performing could perhaps save them. And as the battle raged on the outside, the situation on the inside of the king's guild base had also taken a turn for the worse, as soon as the female player had been told that the forces of the Sorcerer King have broken through thanks to a brilliant maneuver of their ice warrior general. Her legs felt shaky. A moment later the player noticed why. As soon as the first enemy units made contact with the guild's top level, an earthquake was ravaging the guild base, crushing the entrance of the flowing fortress and of many dragon layers, so that the wyverns and dragons within would be unable to take to the sky, leaving the two kings fighting Ainz without any reinforcement. On the ground, the coward of the kings didn't even consider using the soon-finished super tier spell to help his former allies. He had enough, and the Cherubian gatekeepers would help escort him safely away from this war. He would go to the other side of this continent, which he knows, but the Sorcerer King with his puny realm wouldn't, and live out his day in peace and prosperity. But before the spell could finish, the king became airborne, because a lightning-fast ruby-red fist had shattered his helm of perfect protection before he could even notice what happened. Anxious and panicked, he drew his two short twin swords and prepared to fight for his life, lunging forward at the red enemy. Rubedo now also launched herself at the king, but with her arms ahead like a swimmer preparing for a dive. As soon as her body had the same height as the weapons in each of the king's hand, the edges of her hands came crashing down. And instead of just knocking out the blades of the king's fist, Rubedo broke the fingers of her enemy with a swift strike. In anticipation of the coming pain, the king opened his mouth, but before he could do so fully, Rubedo's incoming knee forced his jawbone upward, crashing lower and upper teeth into one another, shattering them like two big ice pieces impacting on one another. But the force of Rubedo's kick was far from exhausted. The sharp bloody rest of the king's once pearl-white teeth now buried itself into the upper and lower jawline. Soon, the bones in it would shatter, just like the teeth, before the passing knee broke the nose of the king, pressing it into his face, bursting the blood vessels in one of his eyes, before forcing it out of its socket, while the other had already been nailed in place by a sharp bone fragment coming out of his cheek. From its exalted position, the eye could see that Rubedo regained ground contact and rushed her fist towards his armor, like a bowling ball would dent and fragment a particularly thin sheet of styrofoam. The armor caved. His lungs were compressed. Saliva, blood, fragments of his teeth and bone, as well as his tongue, were forced out of his mouth, and the king became airborne, before landing on the ground, many meters away from his enemy. Though broken and in pain, the king had one last, one final, one faint hope. Like some New Worlders would do, he put a potion under his armor, and if the armor shatters, the vial containing the potion would do so too, and thus heal him. Even though his body remained devastated, the king drew a small breath, after almost suffocating. But once the forced-out eye regained its sight, the king wished that he had died instead. From a third person's point of view, the king saw marble-white skeletal hands, breathed an unholy aura, touch his face. Upon hearing the words, "Touch of Undeath," his mind went blank, and he fell into a deep coma, from which only pain could, and indeed would, awake him eventually. From the deepest layer of the guild, elite dragon warriors, sent out by the female player to retake the northern side, saw a dark elf girl that they had killed before. But before they could stop another earthquake, a dark elfen boy appeared and unleashed her beasts. 2 dragons among them. Even worse, the white and the red Valkyrie now attacked in a pincer maneuver. On the southern side, a cut-off force managed to unleash the guild's greatest asset, the statue of the first dragon monk. It came to life and broke through the line of Nazarick to finally stop the earthquakes that were clearly originating from the southern side of the fortress, where an armored knight devastated a structure with a world item. While the first hit managed to surprise the knight, her eyes began to light up and she unleashed her true form, a gigantic winged gorilla demon that could shrug off even these devastating attacks the first dragon monk unleashed, as the other forces of Nazarick closed in. Not only his flesh, but also his fate had been cast in stone. After a few minutes of fighting, both sides resumed the earthquake assault. Then the female player inside the guild felt light, before she slammed into the ceiling of their guild base, which had finally met the ground after its fall had stopped. The last Greed King, too afraid to teleport away, suffered considerable damage from the collapse of her own guild base. And upon resurfacing, she thought that now, finally, luck was on her side. Unable to unbury herself completely, someone had lifted the rubble and had taken her hands. Only to remove avarice and generosity, the world item loaded with experience point that she had stolen from Ainz Ooal Gown, or rather Mare. As soon as she adapted to the change in brightness, her eyes were greeted by the Sorcerer King himself. And Atlas, another stolen world item, the very world item that carried the floating city like the Titan carried Earth. As the two world items would soon return to Nazarick, so would the player do. Although to a far colder and far crueler level. And thus the war concludes and Nazarick wins. And with that said, I say thank you very much for watching. I enjoyed this project very much and I hope you did so too. And therefore again, thanks for watching and special thanks to Bad Guy Yee, Ben C, Chrissy, Crowley0221, Sia, Death is Mercy, Deathless Dragonlord, Dystopia II, Feral Shivan, Guy with That Head, Hector Marino, Hoss, Haster, Jacob G, Jana B, Jason, Chromius, Legendarius, Lelouch Britannia with a Mustache, Lexus Fox, Lord Nishikian Rai, Lord Touch Me, Merovec, Mr. Shoes, Michael R, Michael Y, Okill, Overlord General Gasper, Paddy Pantom, Personage, Primus 11, Shadow Lightning Wolf, Shrine Keeper, Texas Deer, the Orc Warboss Rock Ed Smasher, T.E. Wang, Vash Hawkeye, Venture Fanatic, Wilhelm, and Zonegon. Thanks guys. Anyway, have a nice day and I hope to see you all again soon on my next video.